Chapter 15: Sustainability and the Natural Environment. There are many definitions of sustainability. For our purposes, we borrow from the Brundtland Commission, formerly the World Commission on Environment and Development, to define sustainable business as business that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The focus of sustainability is the creation of a good quality of life for both current and future generations of humans and non-humans by achieving a balance between economic prosperity, ecosystem viability, and social justice. The concept is akin to walking lightly on the earth, taking only what is needed and leaving behind enough for future generations to have access to the same resources. Sustainability is not just about cutting back and limiting waste. Rather, it's a philosophy that embraces a new type of abundance, one that can inspire greater levels of business creativity. As the sustainability movement grows, creative business people are developing new ways of doing business that benefits all aspects of the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profits. The roadmap to sustainability identifies several key drivers that underscore the movement towards sustainability, presenting both risk and opportunities. The concept of sustainability has been institutionalized as a form of CSR, with a critical mass of supporters that point to its benefits. 1. Competition for resources. As demand for resources is growing more quickly than they can be replaced. Secondly, climate change. Businesses must be prepared to not only respond to new policies and regulations regarding emissions, but also take advantage of opportunities to profit from new technologies that reduce emissions or create solutions. Third, economic globalization. Wide disparities in social and environmental standards bring risk as well as opportunities. Fourth, connectivity and communications. Stakeholders can monitor and react to sustainability efforts more quickly and effectively. Reputations are more easily and quickly built and destroyed. The Unilever Sustainable Living Plan can be found in Figure 15.1 in your textbook. And it sets out to decouple our growth from our environmental impact, while at the same time increasing positive social impact. It looks at reducing environmental impact, which is greenhouse gases, half the greenhouse gas impact of our products across the life cycle by 2020. In water, half the water associated with the consumer use of our products by 2020. Enhancing livelihoods, sustainable sourcing. By 2020, their goal is to source 100% of agricultural raw materials sustainably. For years, businesses conducted their operations with little concern about environmental consequences. Virtually every sector of business in every country was responsible for consuming significant amounts of materials and energy and causing waste accumulation and resource degradation. For instance, forestry firms and companies that process raw materials such as uranium, coal, and oil have caused major air, water, and land pollution problems in their extraction, transportation, and processing stages. Manufacturing firms, such as those in steel and petrochemicals and paper products, have been major sources of air and water pollution. Most industry sectors have contributed significant levels of pollution with relatively little concern. Businesses have looked the other way, simply labeling the negative consequences of their actions as externalities. Externalities are side effects or byproducts of actions that are not intended and often disregarded. Similar to other broad terms, environment means many things to many people. Trees in the backyard, a family's favorite vacation spot, a trout stream in the mountains, Earth and other planets, space objects in our solar system. And Chapter 15 focuses on the natural environment, specifically what it is, why is it important, and how it has become a major concern, and what businesses and other organizations have done both to and for it. It identifies what we mean when we use the term environment and why it has become one of the most significant societal issues of our time. The chapter describes a variety of responses human organizations, including businesses, have developed to address this issue. And throughout the chapter, the emphasis is on really two themes: that humans are part of their natural environment, and that the environment itself, as well as the issues and human responses related to it, is extremely complex, defines simple analysis. Glossary of important and helpful environmental terms can be found in figure 15.2. Specifically, carbon footprint, the total amount of greenhouse gases a person, product, or company emits directly or indirectly. Carrying capacity, the volume of and intensity of use by organisms that can be sustained in a particular place and a particular time without degrading the environment's future suitability for that use. Ecosystem, all living and non-living substances present in a particular place, often interacting with others. And irreversibility, the inability of humans and nature to restore environmental conditions to a previous state within relevant time frames. Human environment-related actions that appear irreversible are the destruction of a rainforest or wilderness area and the extinction of a species. The impact of business on the natural environment. The following is a list of 10 fundamental environmental issues that really merit consideration: climate change, energy, water, biodiversity and land use, chemicals, toxics and heavy metals, air pollution, waste management, ozone layer depletion, oceans and fisheries, and deforestation. No environmental issue has been more contentious than has the subject of climate change, which is also known as global warming because it is associated with the precipitation of greenhouse gases. For example, the prevention of solar heat absorbed by our atmosphere from returning to space that can persist in the atmosphere for centuries. The debate about climate change's existence poses alarmists against deniers in the realm of climate science, which has been termed a veritable cornucopia of unanswered questions. Debated issues include the evidence and rate of global warming, the extent to which human activity contributes to it, as well as the resolutions and safeguards that might be put in place to thwart forecasted warming trends. Melting glaciers, the decline of crop yields, and the effects of sea level rise are presented as evidence of climate change. While some debate the science, the reality is that climate change is a hot-button issue for businesses, with over 72% of American adults reported to believe that there is solid evidence of global warming. New regulations and initiatives, like the Environmental Protection Agency's Clean Power Plan, was introduced in 2015 by President Obama under his Clean Air Act. It had been put forward to address climate change issues. The plan was designed to lower carbon emissions from U.S. power plants by 2030 to 32% below 2005 levels. However, it's been met with some resistance in the courts with concerns over boundaries of EPA enforcement. And on a global scale, the 2016 Paris Agreement on Climate Change has brought together 190 countries with an overall aim to limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This is the agreement that President Trump has rescinded. In an effort to address these concerns, there are businesses like Microsoft that are leading a movement to offset emissions with an internal carbon tax. And that's a tax on individual business units within the company based on energy usage that goes into a common fund that invests in environmental sustainability projects. Also known as carbon pricing, the tactics seem to be working. And Microsoft has reduced its emissions by 7.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide and saved more than $10 million through reduced energy consumption. Microsoft isn't the only one doing this, with 437 companies, including Disney and Shell, voluntarily charging themselves in 2015. And in figure 15.3, 3, you can see a chart of global carbon dioxide emissions, its total and individual contributors. A major environmental issue is energy inefficiency, or wasting of precious non-renewable sources of energy. Non-reliable energy sources such as coal, oil, natural gas were formed millions of years ago under unique conditions of temperature, pressure, and biological phenomena, hence the term fossil fuels. Once they are depleted, they will be gone forever. The answer to the non-renewability problem is to use as little as possible of these energy sources through implementation of sound energy conservation practices, while also shifting to renewable energy sources. Several technologies for tapping these renewable, low-polluting energy sources are becoming economically competitive with non-renewable sources, and so for business, the energy issue represents not only a challenge but also an opportunity. Water presents problems in both quality and quantity. The quality of the developing world's water quality is in far worse shape than that in the developed world. A staggering 90 to 95% of sewage and 70% of industrial waste is untreated as it flows into rivers, lakes, and oceans. More than 1 billion people worldwide lack clean water, and the problem shows no signs of abating. Beyond the problem with pollution, experts now warn that the world is facing a water bankruptcy. Over 4 billion people, or 2/3 of the world's population, face severe water shortages during at least 1 month every year. In the U.S., the state of California has faced severe droughts for many years in a row. An ecosystem's biodiversity, that is, the variation of life forms inside the system, serves as a key indicator of its health. Ecosystem and habitat destruction through agricultural and urban development activities, and of course pollution, have put at risk both damage to the nervous system, damage to the wildlife, and beneficial plants. Excesses in individual and organizational activities may be responsible for significant and tragic ecosystem and species degradation. Another disturbing environmental issue that human populations face is land degradation. Degradation includes different multiple facets as desertification, deforestation, overgrazing, salinization, and alkalization. Social acidification, urban sprawl, and soil sealing or industrial soil contamination are part of land degradation as well. As the population of the world continues to grow, the problems created by these issues will only increase. The production of toxic substances, whether as constituents of intended products or as unwanted byproducts, is an important issue because of its potential for harm. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, defines toxic substances as chemicals or compounds that may present an unreasonable threat to human health and environment. Two problems are central to the toxic substances issue. First, we are not always aware of the effects, especially the long-term and interactive effects of exposure to the thousands of chemicals produced each year. The DuPont chemical dump, PFOA waste in Virginia, went unnoticed for years because the substance itself was not regulated and it was unknown exactly how the substance was unsafe to digest. Second, toxic substances can be associated with industrial accidents causing unforeseen widespread biological damage. The India chemical plant leak, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant meltdown in the former Soviet Union, the BP oil rig explosion, and the Flint, Michigan lead water poisonous are well-known environmental disasters involving toxic substances. So the short and long-term effects of both outdoor and indoor air pollution are wide-ranging and severe. Air pollution leads to acid rain, global warming, smog, the depletion of the ozone layer, and other serious conditions. It causes serious respiratory or other illnesses, and it's not surprising that it rates high in concern according to public opinion polls. In addition to causing human health problems, ambient air pollution is also responsible for a condition called acid rain. Acid rain refers broadly to a mixture of wet and dry deposited material from the atmosphere containing higher than normal amounts of nitric and sulfuric acids. Indoor air pollution is another environmental problem that is becoming an increasing concern because most people spend the majority of their lives indoors. Indoor air pollution comes from a variety of sources, including oil, gas, kerosene, coal, wood, tobacco products, and building materials and furnishings such as asbestos-containing insulation, damp carpets, household cleaning products, and lead-based paints. The immediate effects of indoor air pollution are typically short-term and treatable. These include irritation of the eyes, nose, throat, headaches, dizziness, fatigue. However, longer-term effects that might show up years after exposure can be severely debilitating or even fatal. These effects include respiratory diseases, heart disease, and cancer. We should give special consideration to waste that is hazardous. Hazardous waste can be generated by manufacturing processes, or they can simply result from discarded commercial products such as cleaning fluids or pesticides. And the risk posed by these wastes creates countless causes for concern. Exposure, whether in the air, water, soil, can cause cancer, birth defects, and a host of other problems. Ozone is an oxygen-related gas that is harmful to life near the Earth's surface, but is vital in the stratosphere in blocking dangerous ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Over 20 years ago, NASA scientists observed a huge decrease in ozone over Antarctica. They then discovered a hole in the ozone layer that has grown as large as the North American continent. Their measurements showed that the flow of ultraviolet light had increased directly under the ozone hole. This phenomenon was attributed to human-produced chemicals, chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, used in refrigeration and halons and used in fire extinguisher systems, as well as other ozone-depleting chemicals. A thinner layer of ozone is associated with a higher rate of skin cancer and other illnesses, as well as an increase in problems with agricultural production. The EPA expresses it well by saying we all live in a watershed, and that is an area that drains to a common waterway, such as a stream, a lake, an estuary, wetland, aquifer, or even the oceans. Trillions of gallons of sewage of industrial waste are dumped into marine waters each year, and these and other pollutants do a lot of damage to the ecosystem. It results in shellfish bed closures, seafood-related illnesses, reduced shoreline because of floods and storms. And once inconceivable, now to about 85% of the world's fisheries are at capacity, or are over capacity, or have collapsed. Conservation efforts have helped some species recover, and such efforts continue. Although humans depend on forests for building materials, fuel, medicines, chemicals, food, employment, recreation, the world's forests can be quickly depleted by a variety of human factors. Deforestation adds to soil erosion problems. It's a major cause of the greenhouse effect. Felled trees are no longer able to absorb carbon dioxide, sometimes burn for land clearing and charcoal, releasing rather than absorbing carbon dioxide. Deforestation plays a key role in global warming. Few would be able to guess which country makes the third greatest greenhouse gas emissions after China and the U.S. Most would guess Germany because of its industry, or Japan because of its cities and high technology. The right answer is Indonesia. It releases 3.3 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year because of deforestation. Environmental problems such as smog, toxic waste, and acid rain can be described as wicked problems. That is, problems with characteristics such as interconnectedness, complexity, uncertainty, ambiguity, conflict, and societal constraints. Every wicked problem seems to be a symptom of another problem. Responsibility for such messy situations is difficult to fix because solutions to wicked problems are seldom complete, and therefore credit for these solutions is seldom given or taken. When no one takes responsibility for adverse environmental effects, a phenomenon called the tragedy of commons is likely to occur. A commons is a plot of land available to all. When the commons is large enough to accommodate the needs of everyone, no problem exists. However, as herders continue to add animals to their herds, the carrying capacity of the commons becomes strained. It is in the self-interest of each herder to allow the animals to graze, even though the cumulative grazing will inevitably destroy the commons. The analogy of a commons can be applied to the environment as a whole, as well as many constituent parts. Nature itself is a polluter and destroyer. The Earth's core is continually polluting many bodies of water and air sheds with a full range of toxic heavy materials. Species have been going extinct since life evolved. As in a continuous cycle of life and death, nature acts as its own destroyer. So what level is ethical? Which school of economic thought should we apply? Following the ethical models and concepts we discussed in Chapter 7 and 8, we can develop a better idea of what environmental ethics is and how it can be practiced. Kohlberg's model of moral development, for example, can be used to identify environmental-related attitudes and behaviors by developmental level. At the pre-conventional or infant level in environmental ethics, humans and human organizations can be perceived as being concerned only with the self and with their own species and habitats. A conventional adolescent level might entail some appreciation of nature, but only when and where such appreciation is commonplace. A post-conventional or adult environmental ethic might include more mature attitudes and behaviors that are more universal, including all species and habitats of greater duration, including unborn generations, and more consistent. Similarly, the ethical principle of utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number, could be expanded in environmental ethics to the greatest good for the greatest number of species and ecosystems. The golden rule could read, do unto other species as you would have them do unto you. In Who Speaks for the Trees, authors Simon, Welcomer, and Gertie show that integrating sustainability into a firm's philosophy is a natural extension of stakeholder theory. They expand the concept of the natural environment beyond living things to the entire ecological system from which the firm obtains resources and to which it bears responsibility for the impacts, both positive and negative, that firms' actions have on it. They invoke the ethic of care and explain that organizations that follow a practice of care would treat the natural environment, which they call the silent stakeholder, with respect. The acronym NIMBY can often be found on bumper stickers and conference agendas and in newspaper articles, college courses, and other communication vehicles. It stands for the not in my backyard phenomenon, and it reflects human denial of responsibility for misuse of the environment. Essentially, NIMBY is an attitude or behavior set based on avoidance or denial of responsibility, and examples of NIMBY abound regarding environmental issues. The obvious difficulty with the NIMBY syndrome is that the entities, human individuals, organizations, or both, causing environmental pollution or degradation are not identified as the sources of the problems, and therefore no action is taken to reduce the problem. Although U.S. federal government has influenced environmental policy since at least 1899, with its permit requirement for discharge of hazardous materials into navigable waters, the major entrance of U.S. government into the environmental issues occurred in 1970 with the signing of the National Environmental Policy Act. In addition to establishing broad policy goals, legislation requires federal agencies to prepare environmental impact statements for any proposals for legislation or other major federal actions significantly affecting the quality of human environment. Environmental impact statements are reports of studies explaining and estimating and environmental impacts of questionable practices and irreversible uses of resources, and proposing detailed, reasonable alternatives to these practices and uses. In 1970, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency was created as an independent agency to research pollution problems, aid state and local government environmental efforts, and administer many of the federal environmental laws. The key piece of federal air quality legislation is the Clean Air Act. The overall approach of this act is similar to that used in other areas of federal regulation, such as safety and health legislation, and that standards are set and timetables for implementation established. The EPA has set primary standards based on health effects and secondary standards based on environmental effects for a variety of air pollutants. The Clean Air Act introduced the concept of emissions trading, cap and trade, to the United States. This approach is intended to reduce a particular pollutant over an entire industrial region by treating all emission sources as if they were all beneath one bubble. A business can increase its emissions of sulfur dioxide in one part of a plant or region if it reduces its sulfur dioxide pollution by as much or more in another part or region. The U.S. government involvement in water quality issues has followed a pattern similar to that of air quality. The Clean Water Act, also known as the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, was passed in the early 70s with broad environmental quality goals and an implementation system involving both the federal and state governments designed to attain those goals. And the ultimate purpose of the Clean Water Act was to achieve water quality consistent with protection of fish, shellfish, and wildlife, and with safe conditions for human recreation in and on the water. So land pollution and degradation issues differ from air and water quality issues because land by definition is far less fluid and therefore somewhat more visible than air and water, and is more amenable to local or regional problem-solving approaches. So state and local governments are mainly responsible. You have several of the Resource Conservation Recovery Act set up a regulatory system for tracking hazardous waste. Toxic substances control requires businesses to identify chemicals posing substantial risk. The other major U.S. government activity in toxic waste is known as Superfund, or more formally, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act of 1980, CERCLA. Superfund is an effort to clean up more than 2,000 hazardous waste dumps and spills around the country, some dating back to the previous century. Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act requires manufacturers to report annually all of their releases into the environment of any more than 500 toxic chemicals. The world species are disappearing at an alarming rate, according to the World Conservation Union, which releases an annual red list of endangered species. Their 2015 report shows that nearly 20,000 species are now considered threatened with extinction, a quarter of the total number of species they assessed. Another United Nations initiative is the Global Compact. It brings thousands of companies from across the world society to support universal environmental and social principles. The Global Compact works to advance 10 universal principles and 17 sustainability goals. Perhaps no force in today's society is more responsible for greening of nations around the world than are the many environmental interest groups making up what has become known as the environmental movement. They are a collection of nonprofit membership and think tank organizations and move the world into the direction of environmental responsibility. And they are responsible for greening of the nations. And they have evolved and been instrumental in really significantly influencing business environmental policy. Environmental groups based on cooperation with business, radical, mainstream, accommodators. Radicals thought of as confrontational behaviors. Mainstreamers seek pragmatic reform through confrontation and cooperation. And accommodators pretty much avoid confrontation and are more trusting of corporations. So among other sustainability interest groups are green consumers. Individuals referred to as green consumers are actual and potential customers of retail firms, usually in countries who express preferences for products, services, and companies that are perceived to be more environmentally friendly than other competitive products, services, and firms. Green employees are a second stakeholder group with which most businesses are concerned, and they play a major role in providing environmentalism at work. One thing to point out, why consumers tend not to buy green when they hold such green philosophies is a paradox that has confounded a lot of companies. Consumers say that they want environmentally responsible products, but sales of those products are often disappointing when they hit the market. Andrew Gershoff and Julia Irwin explored this paradox and found that several issues arise for consumers as they do a cost and benefit analysis of using green products. And one is that consumers question whether green actions will lead to green outcomes. So the benefits are hard to observe, and marketers are not believed because they are not considered worthy of much trust. Green investors is another important business stakeholder involved in environmental issues. Individuals and organizations who prefer to invest with these firms are associated with environmentally oriented companies. A growing number of bond offerings, money market fund, and other financial instruments now include environmental components. Now that caring for the natural environment has become good business, there are a lot of examples of firms who are demonstrating that sustainable business practices can not only help the planet, but also be a source of competitive advantage. Patagonia, as an example, recycled decades before others, it made outdoor gear out of old plastic soda bottles, discovered the dangers of cotton due to dependency on pesticides, insecticides, and defoliants. In 2014, Apple CEO Tim Cook made some bold statements to investors about how Apple did not pursue environmental improvements solely for return on investments. Partners with multiple initiatives to avoid conflict of minerals and unfair labor conditions. The electronics brand with the highest use of renewable energy. CVS Health, the nation's largest pharmacy company, took the impressive stance of stopping the sale of tobacco products in their stores and even going further to offer smoking cessation programs. Tesla is well known for its innovation and development of electronic vehicle. However, its sustainable reach goes beyond the mission. Like Apple, Tesla is building what is generally called an ecosystem of sustainable brands, a group of interconnected elements formed by interactions with others in its community and environment. In the past several years, a shift in the relationship between business and environmental activists, non-governmental agencies, and interest groups has occurred. Accommodation is replacing antagonism as the parties begin to recognize their mutual dependence on each other. More and more businesses are partnering with these groups to accomplish their sustainability objectives. For example, a recent GreenBiz survey showed that large corporations view NGO partners in 4 ways: as trusted partners, they're corporate-friendly, highly credible, long-term partners, useful resources, highly credible organizations known for creating helpful frameworks and services for corporate partners, and the uninvited, less broadly known groups, or those viewed more as critics than partners. In conclusion, we'll look at the future of business, greening or growing. The salient environmental question we all may need to address in the future is, how much is enough? A common business, and indeed the public policy goal in most human society, has been economic growth. Typically, businesses and societies have needed increasing amounts of their materials or energy or both to achieve that economic growth. One potential problem with unrestrained economic growth worldwide is that unless technology or people change significantly within a generation, environmental change and degree from problems change in degree from significant to severe. The pressures on the environment come from many directions. World population is projected to continue to grow, creating greater demand on food and fuel resources. Large countries such as China and India are industrializing, and so they will use increasing amounts of energy and material. The already industrialized countries continue to maintain highly consumptive lifestyles that have strained the environment already. And as the name implies, the sustainability imperative is of the essence. Business no longer has the luxury of deciding whether or not to respond to it. Society in general and the environment in particular cannot wait.